Birleşik Krallık'ta Kent Üniversitesi'nde Bilgi Sistemleri Güvenliği Profesörü olan Chadwick'i sunumu için sahneye davet ediyorum. Mr. David Chadwick, I would like to invite you for your speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I have the pleasure of keeping you awake after your lunch, so I hope I can do that. Before I start, I want to just give some acknowledgements to the people I've worked with at different universities, and also with Dr. Nijar, who's an NHS consultant, and he produced a use case which I'll show you towards the end of my talk. Okay, so what's the true cost of identity theft to people in the world? Do you know? Do I know? In fact, we will never know. Nobody knows. It's massive, we know that. There's some estimates. We can see it runs into billions. Billions in the UK and billions in the US. So when you add it together, you've got billions of billions. It's so big that we've got to do something about it. Why is it so big? It's so big because people are using usernames and passwords generally to identify themselves. And we will show you in my presentation how we have eliminated usernames and passwords. And by using verifiable credentials, we no longer need usernames and passwords for authentication. So verifiable credentials, and they are potentially long-lived electronic credentials that you carry around with yourself on your devices, and you use them whenever you want to access electronic resources. You can think of them as the electronic equivalent of today's plastic cards, passports, driving licenses, as Phil Windley showed in the last talk. And they've got cryptographically protected identity information. Now, in our system, we use them as authorization tokens in what we call an attribute-based access control system. Some people may be familiar with RBAC systems, which is role-based access control. Attribute-based access control is just a more sophisticated version whereby you use a whole range of attributes to give people access to resources. Why are they needed? They're needed because today the vast majority of websites are not able to verify a user's identity in a trustworthy and reliable manner. They either trust the user to say what his identity is, or they don't offer the online service where they need the identity. So, for example, if you think about online banking, if you want to go and register for an online bank account and without any face-to-face interaction with the bank, that's pretty much impossible today because they just don't offer the service. And I'll give you some examples in a minute of services that trust the user. And when I show them to you, you'll say, well, that's a joke. Anybody can say anything, so why would they trust you? But that's the only choice they've got. They either trust you and offer the service, or they don't offer the service. And today's federated identity management systems, they've got a number of limitations, which I'll go into. Phil Windley, in his slide, he showed you how identity is moving up. And federated identity is where we're at today. But where we want to get to is self-sovereign identity using verifiable credentials. So here's an example. You're allowed to sign this petition if you're over 18. Are you over 18 or under 18? Tick the box. Well, you're obviously not going to tick the no box if you want to sign the petition, so it's a joke, isn't it? Here we are, BBC TV. You download TV programs onto your computer. If you want to watch this program, you have to confirm you're over 16. Well, I want to watch the program. I'm not going to click the cancel button. I'm going to say I'm over 16, whatever age I am. So there we've got examples of a system that's trusting the user, which you can see is a joke. Here's another one. You purchase a train ticket in the UK online. If you've got a rail card, you can get a reduction. Do you have a rail card? Well, click the box and tick that you've got one, then you get a cheap rail ticket. How good's that? Okay, let's look at federated identity management systems. This is a slightly different diagram to the one that Phil showed earlier, but it still shows that the identity provider is at the center of the ecosystem. It controls who you talk to. It knows everything about you. You have to connect to the service provider via the identity provider. You log in via the identity provider and it redirects you back to the service provider. So it knows everything about you. This is why Facebook, Google and the like, they love it, because they're capturing your information which they can then monetize and sell. So that's a number one problem with federated identity management systems. Insufficient attribute release is the major problem in today's federated identity attribute space. This is from the Edge again, which is probably the largest federated identity infrastructure in the world. It's got every university in Europe, it's got universities in America, they're all linked together. So we're talking about thousands of universities that you can log into with your federated identity login, but they're saying they're just not releasing the attributes we want, aren't these identity providers? Other limitations, the trust model's wrong. Identity providers have to trust service providers to keep the user's attributes private, especially with GDPR. Identity providers are not going to release identity attributes to service providers they don't trust. Identity providers are often unwilling to release some of the user's attributes to anybody, and they're not willing to release them to most service providers because they don't have a pre-existing federated relationship with them. So you can't even use your IDP that you do have to connect to another service provider because there is no relationship there. What else are the limitations? They may require attributes from multiple authorities. A service provider may require the fact that you're working for a certain company or you're a student. They may require a credit card credential from a bank. They may require a name that's been authorized by the government or something like that. So they require multiple authorities. And again, identity providers can't provide that because they're a single authority. Some of them do it by assigning a globally unique ID to the user, and that's very privacy invasive. IDPs send all the users' attributes at login time, so this is not giving you least privileges, it's actually giving you maximum privileges. And they're susceptible to phishing attacks by redirection. So what happens in this, you go to your identity provider, you go to your service provider who says log in via your identity provider, and they redirect you, but they don't redirect you to your actual identity provider. They redirect you to a fraudulent one that looks like yours. And so the gullible user enters his username and password into a fraudulent identity provider, and hey, he's been phished, and now the attacker can masquerade as the user. Compare this to what we do with our plastic cards and passports today. We have them in our pocket. We can give them to anybody we want to. We can aggregate them together, give as many as we want. We're in control. This is what we want. We want the user to be in control. And verifiable credentials are the electronic equivalent of this. Then they're more secure and more privacy protecting than today's federated identity management systems. This is a variant on the model that Phil showed you earlier. It's the verifiable credentials architecture taken from the W3C working group. This shows that the holder is at the center. The user is at the center of the ecosystem. And the issuer issues credentials, gives them to the holder, and then the holder presents them to the verifier. And he may store them in a local wallet, or the wallet may be remote, but they're stored in some sort of digital wallet. And the verifier trusts the issuer. This is another important thing, as Phil pointed out. There's a trust relationship here. The verifier determines who it trusts to issue which credentials. Now you can see from this model, there's nothing to do with blockchain. There's nothing to do with DIDs. There's nothing to do with sovereign. You don't need blockchain to operate a verifiable credentials architecture. And you don't need a blockchain architecture, and you don't need verifiable credentials to use a blockchain architecture. The two are totally separate, but you can put them together. And we put them together by using the blockchain to store all this information that the infrastructure uses. So we can use the blockchain here to store the identity attributes, their definitions, their schema, to store public keys of issuers, to store trust information, to store revocation information. But it's not essential that verifiable data registry could be as simple as a big long ASCII file that is shipped between all the components of the system. But a blockchain would enhance it. But the message I want to give you is verifiable credentials don't mandatorily need blockchain. Blockchain doesn't mandatorily need verifiable credentials. The two are separate, but when you put them together, you can get synergies. You can get 1 and 1 equals 3. Okay, standardization. The proposed standard has just been published this month. And the working group has just finally finished. So we've been working on this for 2 years, and we've finally finished. And we expect the full standard to come out in about a month's time. It's usually just an administrative procedure to go from the proposed recommendation to the full recommendation. Now, the other important thing to note is that what we specified is the data model for verifiable credentials. We haven't specified protocols. So at the moment, there is no standardized way of passing a verifiable credential from an issuer to a holder and from a holder to a verifier. That will come later. The community group is looking at various different protocols, and people will experiment with different protocols, and eventually one or more protocols will be standardized. But at the moment, there is no standard for shipping verifiable credentials around. So what we did in our research, we said, well, what protocols do exist to authenticate agents, holders to verifiers, and holders to issuers? And we looked at the Fast Identity Online, the FIDO standard, which started work around about 2014, I think, and in 2016 or 17 or so, it was passed on to W3C for standardization, and that is now a full W3C recommendation. It's called FIDO 2, and it came out earlier this year. So we have a standard protocol from the W3C that allows entities to authenticate to each other using public key encryption and passing keys amongst themselves. And I'll show you a diagram of how it works. So the idea is that the user has a device with a browser, he's got a FIDO client on the device, and he's got a key store. That key store may be in the device, or it might be external to the device, but that key store generates unique keys for every website that the user talks to. That's exactly what Phil Lindley said this morning about having separate keys. You get a separate key for every website you talk to. And once you've got your key registered with that website, it means every time you come back to the website, you can prove that it's you by signing a challenge with your private key, which is held in your key store. So the website says, I don't know who you are, I know nothing about you, but I know you are the same person that came last time, because you're using the same public key that you used last time when you registered with me. Now, we thought this is a really good system on which to build verifiable credentials, because FIDO offers strong authentication without usernames and passwords, but it doesn't offer identification, it doesn't offer authorization. So if we take W3C verifiable credentials and we build it on top of W3C web authentication, we've got both authentication, identification, and authorization, all as standardized protocols. And you can see here that the key store will authenticate the user via maybe a biometric face recognition, a fingerprint, or a PIN, or something like that. And the FIDO protocol actually includes in it the way that you talk to the user. This interaction here is known as a ceremony. This interaction here is known as a protocol. You're all familiar with the term protocol. You're perhaps not familiar with the term ceremony. But this is a ceremony of the way that the user interacts with the key store. And the protocol carries ceremony information to make sure that this website not only knows which key has been used, but how the user accessed the key. It can mandate that the user actually use their fingerprint before they're allowed to access the site. So if this website says, you've used your fingerprint, I know it's the public key, I know it's the same fingerprint of the same user, so I'm getting some biometric locking of the user onto the authentication of the website. But as I said, it only provides authentication, it doesn't identify the user, and it doesn't provide authorization. So what we did is we added the two together and we built a FIDO authorization infrastructure where we added extra components into FIDO and we enhanced the FIDO protocol to support the authorization. So how it works, very similar to Phil's demonstration, I'll show you some pictures shortly. The user registers at a website, registers his keys, and he consents to his attributes being released. The user accesses a website. Again, he identifies himself with a public key, and the website has a policy. And the policy is an identification policy which says in order to access me, you need to be identified with the following verifiable credentials. So the device checks if you've got the verifiable credentials stored on your device, and if you have, it asks you to consent to them being released. And this consent's important because this consent allows you to conform to GDPR, because GDPR requires user consent. The user consents to his verifiable credentials being released, and the device gets them and sends them over to the service provider, and then you get access to the site. So what are the benefits of this? First of all, it's not susceptible to phishing attacks because there's no redirection. The service provider is not redirecting you to some fraudulent site. You decide which site you're going to connect to. It protects against identity theft because it's got strong cryptographic protocols. There's nothing that can be copied. They're all using zero-knowledge proofs. It doesn't require usernames and passwords for login. It provides two-factor authentication because you've got the FIDO key, which is a hardware device, and you've got a biometric, which is something you know that's linked to it. It provides least privileges because it only releases the attributes that are actually essential for each transaction you have with a website. And the policy that's provided by the website says, I only need these attributes in order for you to get access. So we get least privileges, and it provides privacy protection and full compliance with GDPR. And I've got some notes here how these are clauses from GDPR for those who are really interested. I've listed various clauses from GDPR and how verifiable credentials allow you to conform to GDPR. So, Dr. Nijar developed this use case, said, okay, we've got a prototype system, let's design this prototype system now. Imagine that a patient wants to get some electronic services from the NHS. And repeat prescriptions is one of the things that is time-consuming in the UK. You have to go to the doctor, you have to hand in your piece of paper, you have to come back 3 days later when the prescription's paper's ready, and then take the paper off to a pharmacist. So you've got this long delay and couple of trips. If you could actually go online to the doctor's surgery, prove it's you in a strong way, and say, I want those drugs to be reordered, and then they can electronically send you the prescription. And then you can go immediately to the pharmacist, or even if the pharmacist is hooked in, you could even electronically send them to the pharmacist. And then hospital appointments again, you get often a letter through the post to say you're invited to attend the hospital on this day. You can't go on that day. You try and ring up to cancel. You can't get through on the phone, or you've got some automated answering machine. People don't cancel their appointments, so you have lots of missed appointments, as it shows there, it's costing $1 billion a year. So these are things which could very easily be done online with a mobile phone. So this is the application that we developed on the mobile phone using FIDO and verifiable credentials. So how it starts is, first of all, the user is sent a letter to his house. And the letter comes from the NHS. It says, thank you for agreeing to register with our online services. Here is a one-time password that you must enter into our website. And use your NHS number to identify yourself. In the UK, everybody has an NHS number. Everybody knows their NHS number. So the NHS has a database, NHS numbers of all the patients. What it does is it puts a one-time password in the database for the NHS number. It sends that out to the user at home with a letter. The user then takes his device, might be a laptop, it might be a mobile phone. He types in the URL in the letter, he connects through to the website, he types in his NHS number, and he types in his one-time password, presses register. That goes across to the NHS website. It now can authenticate the user and say, okay, I know who you are. And then FIDO takes over, and you do FIDO registration. You generate a key pair. You have to authorize that key to be sent to the NHS, but you get a new key pair, and now your public key is stored by the NHS. That means every time you go back to the NHS website, it will know it's you because you're the only person in the world with that public key that FIDO generated specifically for you. So you've got a way of permanently authenticating to the website without any usernames and passwords, simply by touching your finger on your fingerprint reader of your phone to authorize the release of your public key to sign a challenge from the NHS website. After the FIDO's finished, the verifiable credentials comes in. Now it knows who you are. It sends a message to your device to say, we are willing to issue you with a credential that says you're a patient from the UK NHS. Do you want to accept it or not? So here again, we've got user consent. The user is consenting to the NHS releasing his or her NHS credential. If the user accepts it, that will then be stored on his phone, the fact that he has the potential to get an NHS credential anytime he wants from the NHS website. And after that, he gets a thank you message. The user then goes along to the hospital and he visits his consultant. And the consultant says, well, you're coming here and you're making trips and you're getting pieces of paper sent around. I have an electronic service. Would you like to register for my electronic service? If you do, you'll be able to make appointments with me online. You'll be able to book repeat prescriptions online. And the user says, yeah, that's wonderful. I'd love to do that. So the doctor says, okay, well, connect to my URL and enter this one-time password. And then we will generate a feed or key pair for you, and that will be stored on your device, and then I can authenticate you any time that you come back to my website. So the user generates the key pair, authorizes it to be released. The doctor's website says, you are now Dr. Nijar's patient. Do you want this credential to be released or not? And the user says, yes, that's great. So now the user has two verifiable credentials on his telephone. He has one that says he's an NHS patient for the whole NHS, and he's got another one that says he's a patient of Dr. Nijar, the consultant from Southampton. So now when he's at home, he can go to any NHS website in the UK, and he can click on online, on login, patient signing, it says there. So he clicks on patient signing. Now what this causes the website to do is to send a policy to the mobile device of the user to say, in order to access this secret services, or if you like, protected services of the NHS, you have to be an NHS patient. Only NHS patients can actually get past this gate. So he clicks on it, and it says, you need to be a patient from the NHS. Are you willing to release this? So the user clicks, yes, I'm willing to release that. I'm a patient from the NHS. He swipes his finger to confirm that, and he gets into the website. Now, each hospital will have lots of different services offered by different people, and you need different credentials to access different services. So here is the X-ray service, and you'll need one credential to access X-ray. You've got the consultancy service, you've got the orthology, etc. Each of those, when you click on them, a different policy will come from the service provider to say, to access this service, you need to provide the following verifiable credentials. In our case, the user is going for the consultancy service, so he clicks on consultancy, and it says, in order to access this, you need to be Dr. Nijar's patient. The device says, well, you've got that verifiable credential. Are you willing to release it? The user says, yes, I am. He swipes his finger to allow his private key to sign the challenge, and his credential is released. He now gets the book appointment, cancel appointment, etc., and off he goes. So that's showing the book appointment screen and the confirmation and the cancel appointment screen and the repeat prescription screen. All of those he can access straight away because he's already proven that he's a patient. So we tried this with user trials. We went to the hospital and we did the trials with 10 outpatients. They were aged from under 20 to over 80. So we had a full range of people, and we gave them the mobile phone, and they registered their fingerprint on the mobile phone, and then we went through it. And they unanimously found this easy to use, and they liked the use of fingerprints much more than usernames and passwords. And one user said they would prefer voice or iris scanning, but the other 9 said they really liked that. And that is actually going to be published in the paper in December this year. There's a special edition of IEEE Standards Communication magazine coming out in December this year, and there'll be a full description of those, of the trials and of our work in that paper. So the conclusions then, they're privacy protecting, they help significantly reduce identity theft for the reasons I gave before. They give the user full control. The service provider only needs to ask for the attributes needed for authentication and identification for the particular service. So you've got this least privileges, privacy protecting release of attributes. There's no globally correlating unique identifier. And the IDP doesn't know which service provider you're talking to because you're releasing the verifiable credentials from your device to the service provider. So, that is about the end of my talk. I don't know if we've got time for questions. We haven't had questions before, but I'm quite willing to answer one or two questions if anybody would like to in the time that's remaining.
Evet, sorusu olan varsa alabiliriz. Do you have any question? Mikrofonu uzatabiliriz. Mikrofonumuz hazırsa, evet.
Bir soru vardı.
Thank you for this presentation, Professor Chadwick. Welcome to Turkey. I don't understand one point, and I would like to ask it. I couldn't understand who will own the private case and who will define the RSA algorithms. We will, for example, create the private and public case.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite get the question. I will try and repeat it to you, and if I understood it correctly, you tell me yes. If I didn't, you repeat your question.
Okay.
You said who allocates the private keys?
Yes.
The FIDO device on your device. Every FIDO device has a hardware store which generates keys. Now, this could be a USB token that you plug in to a USB socket, or in a mobile phone, it's the actual SIM card within the phone. So your actual device has a hardware token inside it, and it generates multiple private key pairs. So
Okay.
they're in your device, they're stored in your device, or on external USB token, and you can't get the private key off it because it's stored in hardware.
Okay.
Okay.
Because I asked this question because at one point you told if web services or service providers check our public case, right?
They do what, sorry?
Service providers checks our public case. Is it?
Yes, correct. Your public key is then made public, okay? But
yes,
typically, it only goes to the particular service provider that you've generated the key for. Because remember, you have multiple private keys. For each site you talk to, you have a different private key. So your public key is only really ever needed by the one that you're talking to. But in essence, it's a public key. It could be shared to anybody.
Okay, I understand my question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Evet.
Okay.
Ön tarafta bir beyefendi var, elini kaldırıyor. Buyurun.
Yeah, thank you for the information, Professor. As far as I understood that verifiable credentials each use a schema. So let's say a university provides me a verifiable credentials in some kind of schema, and
Yep.
another university provides another verifiable credentials in another schema. So eventually, if these verifiable credentials, they have wide usage, and if these universities, they are using different schemas, then these data won't be interoperable.
Right, I understand your question, and it's a very good question. Now, there are sort of two answers I can give you to that. The best answer is that all the universities agree on the same schema. And that schema is stored on the blockchain, and they all share the blockchain, and they all have a copy of the blockchain. That's the best answer, okay? We agree on a national schema. Even better, we agree on an international schema. Well, I can tell you that there is work undergoing in Europe already to standardize the schema for degree certificates, okay? Based on verifiable credentials. So we're already working, there is work already going on the schema for degree certificates, international, okay? So that's the best solution. But the verifiable credentials standard also recognizes that not every industry sector, not every set of users may adopt the best solution, and they may indeed do what you say. Company A has one schema, Company B has a different schema. Verifiable credentials mandates that your schema has a globally unique URI, so that you might both use, for example, the term degree or role, organizational role. You might both say, this is organizational role in this company and this is organizational role in this company, but they're different definitions and different schemas. Well, the verifiable credentials standard mandates that that has a unique URI and that has a unique URI, and because they've got unique URIs, when they interchange it, they know that what's an organizational role is actually this unique URI and is different. So the two systems, if they're sophisticated enough, should be able to go onto the World Wide Web, download the schema definition from the URI, okay, and then understand that this schema is different to their schema. So that's, I hope that answers your question. Okay? Right.
Teşekkür ediyoruz. Thank you very much for your speech.
Okay. Thank you.
Alkışlarınızla David Chadwick'e sunumundan dolayı teşekkür ediyoruz. Kıymetli konuklar, şimdi bu salonda Mike Lauder programa devam edecek. Bu arada hemen bir hatırlatma yapmak istiyorum. Üst katta bulunan salonlarda sunumlarımız olacak. Dolmabahçe salonunda sunumlarımız gerçekleştirilecek.